Now I want to talk about a screening layer and developing an effective screening layer. A lot of reasons for screening. For example, screening deer from deer, deer from predators, deer from you. Talk about side cover in the woods, really critical screening. But when it comes to screening off edges of habitat, you know, we have a water hole in here, for example. We expect the deer to be right in there. So if we're out here on the outside, we actually have a tunnel in here too. We don't want the deer to see us. So like our tunnel right here, we have deer that come out in this lower valley here. So we want to be able to go through here and get into a stand location without them seeing us here, without them seeing here. So screening, it's obvious we need screening, but what do you screen with? We'll go through some different types of screening and why. This is our switchgrass. This is a cave and rock variety. You can see how tall it is right here. It's all frost seeded. Following the frost seeding methods that we talk about, it's pretty easy to do. And within this line, you can look at it. When I walk through here, this line is about 6 feet wide. Yeah, I go into here, and I'm on the other side of it. You can tell we're a deer at a deer level. They're not going to see me. So this is effectively wide enough to screen what we're trying to screen, and then we have a lot more on the inside in there too. So when I look at, like, when you screen something, it has to be thick enough. This switchgrass around food plots, for example, where you're trying to keep deer on the inside of the woods, big buck cruising by, from just looking out in the field and saying, well, nothing's out there, I don't need to go and investigate. You add 6 feet of switchgrass, that's enough to hide deer from deer. When you get out to an area like this, I want to be able to come through here and not spook deer just on the inside of the woods. 6 feet's not enough. Just your boot noise coming through, walking, steps hitting the ground, maybe your bow accidentally hits something on your body. We want to ride our QuietKat bikes through here, which are really quiet, but still there's a little bit of noise associated with it. So when we come through here, I need to have 15, 20 feet of switch between myself and those deer that might be down in the woods. So when you're thinking human border, more 15, 20, 25 feet wide. If it's a major border where there's a road system, people are walking along it, and you can use something like switch to effectively screen, then maybe even 40 or 50 feet. Corners where you have a food plot that wraps around a field edge, you might have 50, 60, 70 feet in those corners because you're trying to effectively hide deer on the inside from your approach in a vehicle, other vehicles going by, people walking down the road. So start thinking about those thicknesses and how much screening you need based on where you actually need the screening. You know, for example, deer from deer, deer from you walking by hunting, and then major encroaches like a road system or a house, kids playing in a field, whatever it might be, a school, a golf course. Use your imagination for how many areas you can screen, and it needs to be a lot wider. Now, what do you screen with? What I like about switchgrass is when it's this height, you can kind of see, I'm only 5'9", I got some boots on, but this is starting to get up in that 7-foot range right here, 7.5, some of this switch. And we've taken care of this switch meticulously. A lot of times switch doesn't get to the desired height that someone wants, and it's because there's weeds in it. We take out the weeds. You can't just throw this down here. If there's a weed mix in there, doesn't matter if it's only 10%, it's going to make these stalks thinner, smaller diameter, and it's going to make the grass a lot shorter. So you have to get the weeds out. That's critical. But when you do, switch is nice because you can't see through it when it's 5, 6 feet deep. So that's a really good thing. Now we look at other screening. We have a screening product, we call it our deer fence. That is a mix of different types of sorghum and a base of Egyptian wheat. Egyptian wheat is something I've been using for many, many years. Produces a very thick wall. Again, can't see through it at 10, 12, 15 feet wide. It'll get 8 to 10 feet tall. So imagine a couple feet higher than this, 3 feet, sometimes 4 feet, but you can't see through it because the leaf structure is almost all the way down to the ground. Think more like corn when it comes to Egyptian wheat and sorghum. So you can get away with 10, 12 feet if you're screening deer from deer. And then I like to go 20, 30 feet when you're screening yourself from deer and it's a major access route for you as a hunter. So then you need that a little bit wider. There are screening varieties out there that are annuals. You know, that deer fence is an annual. I'd rather put, for example, we get our switchgrass growing and maybe I come out into this area and I have 20 feet of deer fence or 15 feet or 10, while I'm getting this established right here, and then I get rid of this turns back to ag. Or you do that in reverse on the inside, where if we had a food plot over there, I'd have the switchgrass I'm establishing on the outside, the annual screening on the inside, and then once this outside is thick, I'm getting rid of that annual screening and returning that to full food plot space. A lot of times when you're developing food plots, that's a good thing too, because now you can actually attract more deer. By year 2 or 3, you have more deer, so then you need to offer more food, and that's when you're scaling back on your annual screening. So I look at annual screening as a short-term solution. Switchgrass, depending on your situation and height that you need, is a long-term solution. Don't fall for some of the really super tall screening blends out there. We've used them out here before, and I see them on client properties a lot, where it's a really tall stalk up to 8-10 feet, and then it has a leaf structure and a head. So some of those, I've had them out here, they're 13-14 feet tall, but you can look right through the stalks 200 yards out into the field, and that's not a good thing. You need to plant those 30-40 feet wide to actually have an effective wall to not be able to see through, and something that actually lasts all deer season long. So that can be bad. Taller is not necessarily better. When it's not thicker down below, you need a lot more space for something like that. Now, in the case where we have a power line coming across this field up when we first come in, it's about 500-600 yards long. We only have about 12 to 15 feet of space to work with under that power line. Switchgrass isn't tall enough because of the roll of the land. Like, you're walking on one side and deer can see you on the other because it tips up. So you can't hide yourself with something as short as switchgrass. The annual screening might be a little bit better, but I want something more than 10-15 feet wide when it's that annual screening. More like when we're, like I said, when we're screening ourselves for deer, then more like 15, 20, 25, 30 feet wide, you know, because I want to make sure. Something like miscanthus grass, not even something we offer. It's Maple River Farms in Michigan is probably the best source for that. They source a lot of hunting industry companies and companies around the country. That's where you get the cheapest rate. You can buy in bulk. They're a major producer and wholesaler of miscanthus grass. And that I'd recommend, if you're only going to go 3 rows, then 12-inch spacing, 12 by 12 staggered rows, but really 4 rows at 12-inch spacing, or 18 inches at the least or at the most for spacing is really critical for that miscanthus grass. I go to a lot of properties where it's 2 rows, and even if they're 12 inches apart, you can still see through them. They need to be more like 3 feet, 4 feet wide, 12-inch spacing, staggered, and that'll get you the desired amount. And you're not really taking up a lot of space that way. You're really talking about just several feet and getting a really good stand of something like with miscanthus grass, and you can actually grow that under power lines. So when you need the height or you're under power lines, then that's a really good option. And then finally, the conifers, we talk about those a lot, where they're probably the cheapest option, but you still want to get those more like 5 by 5, 6 by 6 spacing, and really tight wall. Norway spruce, white spruce are really good combinations, but you want those at least 4 rows and staggered. 5 or 6 is better, of course. Again, they take up more space. You got to maintain them, but once they wall in, you could have a complete evergreen wall. I say spruce because they hold the lower boughs all the way down. And in the case of our house around here, we have rows of spruce, shrubs from big rock trees, and then our switchgrass too. And the shrubs can be a great option, but I do like to go more like 20 to 30 feet wide on those to have a complete wall, because if they lose their leaves and you can see through them, it kind of goes back into that. If you have that tall screening wall, you know, the super high that people advertise up to 13, 14 feet, and you can see right through the stalks, then it's no good either. So really have to be careful. I go wider on annual screenings and shrubs. You can go very narrow on switchgrass like this. And then you have to look at it too, you know, what you're trying to screen, what you're doing. Sometimes if you use too much natural, like if you have a tree and a shrub border, you can actually put deer in that as you're accessing, because they're watching you and they're bedding in there at the same time. That's no different than using corn as a screening or some type of food. For years and years, I've been stressing no food in your screening. So we use a very bitter type sorghum that's not a food variety. Birds might like it, but you don't want some of the sweeter, more forage varieties of sorghum. You don't want food in your screening. That could include sunflower seeds, vining peas, tall soybeans. Our wholesaler even suggested we use sun hemp, and that's a really bad one. Deer love to eat it during the summertime. So again, you don't want to put any kind of food variety that they're going to eat, because then they're going to be munching on your screen while you're walking by, trying to keep deer from each other. They're going to eat it down. So those are some effective ways to screen that we found throughout the years. Dylan, I'm hopefully can go back a little ways. I don't know if you can get some of that Egyptian wheat footage from way back in the day, where we'd actually hide a blind in the middle of it. The bottom line is really make sure that you're getting something thick. That'll determine how wide it has to be, and then of course the height that you need ultimately for future success. And don't discount using something like an annual screening next to your permanent conifer screenings, flanked by some switchgrass, so that you're really looking at like, okay, I'm building something for right now, which is that temporary screening of something annual, and then something intermediate, which would be something like a switchgrass, maybe in miscanthus, and then something long-term like spruce. Bottom line is you can't see through any of it, and that's a very good thing when it comes to screening. And I hope this is a good illustration, because this is one of our many walls. We have about 3 miles of switchgrass out here on the property. We have so much edge, and this is what we want around the entire property, so that we're insulating tractors, people out in the fields, and our approach from the deer on the inside. Guys, it's food plot time, and I really urge you to check out our food plot company, Pure Wildlife Blends. It's called Pure for a reason. I invite you to check it out. We have food plot blends for all types, and we try to give you all this content on YouTube, articles on the site, to help you make sure you not only do it right, plant it right, but you pick the right seed blend for your circumstances.